Thank you for joining us back. Let's see how you doing again today.
I'm doing great. I'm doing phenomenal. Yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for seeing you again. Still on I Achieving Women. This is episode 4. Um, in the episode 3, little recap, we talked about wellness, emotional wellness for high achieving women. Um, Bottom line, we talked about involuntary emotional triggers. We want to continue from here in episode 4. Um, we're going to give out some tips how to manage those triggers that we cannot control. Even though we did everything, those triggers are going to happen anyway. But what we do at that point to kind of help ourselves since we cannot control those triggers. Um, in episode 1 and 2, we talk about boundaries for high achieving women. So in this episode 4, we're gonna kind of recap on those boundaries and the tips for involuntary triggers for high achieving women to kind of use um, for emotional wellness and self care altogether. Because if we can manage and create boundaries, we can manage those triggers. We know, kind of what to do, how to manage them. I think high achievers should be fine and still able to achieve everything they want to achieve since they know how to manage it, they know what the triggers are. Um, they can avoid um, avoidable triggers just to manage the emotions. However, thank you again for joining us, Dr. Said. Um, in this, so since there are involuntary triggers that can trigger high emissions on top of being in high achievers, so how we talk about hormones that regardless of what we do, they're gonna happen anyway. So how do you regulate, or how do you? What are the? Can you give us a tip to kindly manage those triggers, such as the hormone, like involuntary triggers, stressful job, like you still have to work, but the work is very stressful, but you still need a job. So how do you manage through those things since they are involuntary actions that triggers our emotions?
Right. And you bring up really great points. People still have to go to work. You just can't run away from your job because the job does something to keep us sustained
Oh
and
yeah.
keep us, to have the roof over our head and the lights paid and the
Yeah.
water
Mhm.
slowly, freely. And so we have to recognize that cortisol, I didn't really spend too much time on cortisol, but that is one of the primary stress hormones that our body has. And oftentimes, a lot of women and men who are high achievers, they are experiencing stress on a day-to-day basis, and it can offset anxiety or maybe fear when levels are just too high. And so, I always lean into learning and being aware of what are our stressors. And stressors can come in so many different ways. It can be in the form of relationships. Peer relationships can stress us out, whether it be at work or whether it be at home or within our immediate community. Our environments can be stressful, whether it be again work or home or as we navigate the world outside of us. And so if we go through all the stressors, we're conscious of what's causing me to get easily triggered, right? What is sending signals to my brain that tells me that maybe I'm in danger. And how we increase that capacity obviously is through self-care. I believe that we can take on loads, but we're speaking to loads that are, maybe very overbearing, and it collapses our system internally where it causes the stress and it causes us, to experience the fear or the anxiety or whatever else that comes with it. And so here's a quick tip: find ways to, be relaxed. That's
Mhm.
very important, whether it be through breathing, something as simple as taking deep breaths in and out. You're inhaling and exhaling, that simple action can really cleanse the system of, toxic energy that is stored up. We also, recognize that, when we're stressed, our muscles, they get tense, right? And so we have to find ways to progressively relax that muscle so that it won't store and trap unnecessary stress within our body, because we enter into a fight or flight response. And so the stress hormone that is produced when we are, under deep stress, as you know, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and fornicate. And so when we're experiencing that, we get that triggered, it causes us want to do an action. And so to help us to regulate those actions, we have to incorporate, movement or mindfulness or changing our lifestyle, prioritizing rest, eating a balanced diet, limiting maybe certain foods or beverages that can be harmful to us and how in our recovery. We can definitely lean into the mental aspect of it and emotional strategies, like maybe journaling to process your feelings and to process aspects of work that are stressful, or maybe practicing something like daily gratitude, being grateful to have a job, being grateful to serve in the roles that we serve in, being grateful to having a family. Believe it or not, humor can improve the outlook on life. And so finding ways to just laugh and to experience joy through maybe jokes and so on and so forth can help to improve the mood. But then I want to touch on this, it's very important. We have, in our society, oftentimes there is this spirit of isolation where people
Right.
withdraw, they avoid, they don't want to be in the midst of stress. But stress is natural, it's a normal response, it's a hormone that we have, it's how we deal with the stress. And so sometimes we want to isolate because we don't want to feel the feelings, we don't want to feel the pain, we don't want to feel the intensity of it. But as we feel it, we are able to tolerate it, and we're able to build internal muscle to be able to flex against it when it comes. And so connecting with family, connecting with friends, finding ways to connect with community, and then learning ways to manage our time so that we recognize that, like, if we're clocking in on a 9 to 5 job, then we're using boundaries to say no minute over at 5:01 or no minute early at 8:59. We manage our time and we prioritize what matters to us the most while still balancing and taking care of our job.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful explanations. Talking about boundary, you mentioned. We talk about boundary in from episode one. We see it happening in episode two. We're seeing it happening again. Managing emotions, self cares. So really, boundaries is a huge factors that we can look into, that we can use to control those two things: self care, emotional wellness, anything. Boundaries. I want to touch base a little bit more about using boundaries um, to kind of control our emotions, to manage it for self-care purposes. Um, Different kind of boundaries. So let's talk a little bit more about boundaries. So we talk about how to set the boundaries. We can use the same boundaries as a emotional filter. We can use it to plan our days. We can use it to schedule. We can use it in anything to manage our emotions. You can use it for self care purposes. If you can manage your emotions, it's a self care, right? So now we have different kind of boundaries. People create boundaries for different reasons. They create it out of whatever is going on with them. We have physical boundary, we have emotional boundary, if you want to create boundary around your time. But the one specific one I want to get a little more clarification with is digital boundaries and communication boundaries. I think it, it could be a little practical for people to create physical boundaries. Okay, I want to take a break for me today. This is my time. Yeah, but how about communication boundaries where you cannot control what others does, but you can only control your aspect? So how do high achiever manage to communicate to control communication boundaries or to create one when they still have to communicate with others?
That's an important question. I think it depends on the person. It falls on the person. When we think about boundaries, it's about what limits we set on accessibility and availability. And so individuals have to remember that they have agency and autonomy over self. Work, they may govern, our work schedules based on that contractual agreement. But at the same time, we still have agency to say what we can control and agency to respond to what's out of our control. And so that's very important because oftentimes when we're not aware of our sense of self, we can be so immersed on our goals for success where we lose who we are and we forget I am an equal player in this. I can choose to stay at this job, or I can choose and be empowered to find
Right,
a job. And here's the key word, that is aligned with my life, right? And so oftentimes many people may not feel aligned, but there are other reasons why they have to stay tied to a job. It's security.
right.
Sometimes the market is just tough right now.
Oh yeah.
The days of, wanting to kind of hop and skip at jobs. I'm not discouraging anyone to do that, but it's just people are more conscious to just up and leave. And so there's more stress trying to work through toxic, hostile circumstances. And so that's why
Mhm.
the control comes back to them to say, we can control in certain ways how we respond to this toxicity at work or to these levels of stress by choosing to let me find a moment of gratitude, let me go for a walk, let me choose to build relationships and maintain relationships. Those are choices that, although we're in the midst of stress, it helps us to manage it in a way that it creates more, it's bearable for us to tolerate it. And so again, we have that responsibility to show up in it through choice. And it's not to say, oh, you choosing to stay in that situation. No. Again, I'm conscious that not everyone has that flexibility to move
Right,
about and create a job or to work another job. But it's saying with the resources you have in this physical moment, how are you choosing to either look at your situation as doom and gloom or choosing to shift the mindset to say that's a part of my day, it's not the whole day. That's a choice,
right.
right? And so I'm gentle with saying that and reminding people we have agency. We can
Right.
create the boundary to say how much access. And so that means we may need to create some out of office reminder that, again, going back to 9 to 5, at 5:01, it triggers people to say, I'm off the clock.
Right.
I don't, I'm not
Yes.
governed by this job right now, contractually, right? And
Mm-hmm.
availability is we give a door to say what we make ourselves available for. So sometimes that may mean it's okay to say no. Find language that protects you as an individual, because we have to also account for sometimes people, if they're not clear on their own boundaries and not secure in hearing people to say no, that can trigger an unhealed wound in them. So understand who you're speaking to and find language that doesn't put you in harm's way. And then again, choice is using our resources. If it becomes hostile, guess what? there's HR to protect. Hopefully HR is doing their job, right? They're on the job,
Yeah,
and
that's
they're
another
hire
thing.
resources that are there to keep the worker protected. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, yes, you did. You did. It beautiful elaborations. Um, Thank you, thank you. That's a beautiful elaborations on these boundaries, because I'm seeing boundaries as everything now in managing my life in personal and talk about achievers. I think setting boundaries, and you touch base on um, advancing ourselves as well. Use as it could be something somebody else want to use as a boundaries, while managing their life and still be practicing achieving. Um, Thank you very much, Dr. C, for joining us. In this episode 4, we will kind of wrap up now from episode 1 all the way to 4. You're right there. I want to thank you again for showing up. In this 2026, um, just one quick question before you leave, Dr. C. So we talked about boundaries. We talked to give some tips on how to manage involuntary triggers. Um, so how do we know? We know when to set the boundaries if um, we are able to identify our triggers. We are aware of what's going on. That's when we can know. Oh, I'm gonna do something about it. But amen. And but to maintain the boundaries, because some of the high achievers, they will be so focused on trying to get this, trying to be perfect in this, they forgot to set the boundaries. So for those type of people, how did they manage maintain it? There's one thing to set up a boundaries, there's one thing to manage your emotions, but how do you stay maintaining it without having to take extra time of, oh, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and they forgot they already set the boundary, saying at 5 p.m. I'm not answering no more phone calls. If that is your boundary, or um, I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna go and jog and run, journaling. Some people forgot. They get lost in the middle of trying to be perfect. So for such people, what advice do you have for them?
I appreciate that question because it's one thing, like you're saying about having boundaries. It's another thing of maintaining this lifestyle. And so it's in the word, it's maintenance. And so the question is, how do we go back to understanding what our values and our needs are? What's our why? That's important. Getting clear on what our why is. Why am I doing this job? Why am I showing up in this way? How am I connecting to my values and the needs that I originally set out for when I'm working this role? And then also it comes with, how do we clearly communicate what our needs are? And so oftentimes, communication is always evolving, and what may have, helped us to communicate initially what our needs were in this present moment, they shift over time. And so finding ways that when they shift, finding new language and new techniques on communicating the things that matter to us and that bring value to us as a worker. Also, the last one is consistency, right? And so as we are consistent, then we can kind of speak to this idea of follow through, teaching others. It's not so much about teaching ourselves what our limits are, but it's teaching others who may have their own false understanding of what they think our limits are and what we should and should not do. And so it's kind of going on this journey with them of, they may have met me in one season where I was, presenting in one way, but we recognize that people evolve, right? When they take on these new jobs. And so as I evolve, I'm going to be consistent in communicating what, again, goes back to the needs that I have, and what, how I want to show up in this moment. And then lastly, what protects it is prioritizing our self-care. And so when we're taking a step back and checking in with self, then I'm refilling my cup to say, oh, it's time to have that conversation with so and so. When I'm taking time to be aware of when I'm burnt out, then I can kind of say, oh, then like let me, do XYZ that's not work related to fill my cup. And so we have to prioritize self-care so that, it's not a last resort, but it's really the first, response, because oftentimes people may say, "Oh, well, you're being selfish. I've grown up in environments where, you should do for others." It's not to say that we're not serving others. It's to say that if I'm not selfish with my time, if I'm not selfish with my mental health, if I'm not selfish with my consumption of, what I'm allowing through this toxicity, then it's going to spill over. And guess what? Here's an important word. I'm going to be a hazard. It's going to be impairment to the organization and even to self. And so we're getting so clear on self that says, my self care, it says, I don't want to be an impairment. And so I have to focus on self so that I can have that capacity to love. I can have that capacity to be compassionate. I can have that capacity to meet the goals and to live out the mission of this company. And so as we're clear on that, then I believe that it leads to wholehearted living. It leads to fuller meaning, fuller purpose. And it's not a question about how I'm showing up for them, but more so, man, I'm showing up for me. And they're just getting the overflow as I show up for them at this job.
Thank you, Dr. Sway. As we going to wrap up the episode 4. Thank you. From episode 1, we talk about self-care. Episode 2, we talk about emotional wellness, how the tips, how we can manage our emotions, the benefit, and how to stay consistency, how to maintain such boundaries so we can stay on the line and still achieving our goals. Thank you again. Again, can you tell us a little bit about your practice, how you can be contacted for our viewers that are not with us from the previous episode when you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So, for those that have been listening and following along, thank you so much for, just holding this space for Taiwo and myself today. But if you're just joining us, my name is Dr. Lindsay Side, and I am a therapist and the chief operating officer over at Just Pivot Wellness, where they believe people can have wellness with intention. And so the work that, we do in the community is really working with individuals who present and say, I'm high achieving, but I'm having a hard time connecting to self-care, right? And so they experiencing a high level of stress and wanting to get tools to really find balance and meaning within life. And so if you feel as though that you are one of those individuals where you're pouring your heart into your work, but then you're coming up empty and you're burnt out on the other side, I'm here to support you. I'm primarily based in Florida, but I have other offerings for people across the world, no matter where you're from, to tap into the work that I do. And so I hope to hear more and see you. You can follow me at Just Pivot Wellness or go to our homepage at www.justpivotwellness.com. We would love to hear from you. Drop a comment in the box, and we hope to see you around.
Thank you. As you know, this is 20th century high technology usage. Are you on any social media platform?
Yeah, so we have a YouTube, we have TikTok, and we have social media. We have a homepage that people can connect with. We have a newsletter, and so if you want to join our newsletter and be a part of our family, you'll be our pivot pal, where you just tune into where we send, just monthly, like information about wellness, right? What wellness with intention looks like. And so, like you said, like we're in a world where people are connecting at the speed of light. And so if you're on any of those platforms, we invite you to follow us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Say. And hopefully we get to see you around on our next episode when we tap into other um, issues we could be facing as women or men within your practice. All right. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time today, and I'll see you around.
Thank you.